I am Christy Sullins, like Becky shared, and with her very selfishly focused story, what she didn't share was she was the only warm one all night. Susan clung on the edge of the bed like her life depended on it, and I laid against a brick wall. So do not feel bad for her. Susan and I had frostbite, and Becky was warm. So, there's some real to go with that story. No, I think Stuart's going to put, is it me? Okay. I think Stuart's going to put a picture of my current reel on the screen. This is the most unreal, real picture of our entire life. So look how, this is like what I need at my house. So this is my family. If you read the bio, which you'll laugh because my husband wrote and then I promptly rewrote most of it. That is my husband right there in the plaid. Not even my other half. He's the most opposite part of me that could ever be created. If any of you do, Enneagram, how many have you heard of the crazy Enneagram personality movement? Okay, see, there's a couple of us that know our numbers. So I'm a 6, and you couldn't get any farther from a 7 on me if there were any more numbers created. And he is a 7, and he has no 6 in his life other than the woman he shares a bed with. So he is my total opposite and my constant cheerleader. If he was here, you would know it because he would have greeted all of you. He would have made sure you had meat, which is the love language because he's Italian and Portuguese. So meat is the love language. And then there is he doesn't even look like that. My 17-year-old, he'll graduate next year. Can we all say it? And this is my daughter, Sophie, proof that God has the greatest sense of humor because she is so non-girly and so brilliant and the biggest sci-fi nerd. So we don't know who she came from, but she's there. And then he's so cute in that picture. He's turning 14 tomorrow. I know, and we lived in a state with no humidity in this picture. We have currently lived in Alabama. So if Stuart had posted the selfie that my husband, he has curls, like curls everywhere. But he's a hot mess, and we love him. So this is my reel that's not at all reflected. So I am a mom of 3 teenagers. Like your sweet worship pastor's wife, we had all of ours in 3.5 years. So what that means for you is that then you have 3 teenagers. Just encourage her along the way. But we have almost 20 years of marriage together. So there's a lovely dose of real. And we have lived in at least 6 states together in different churches and ministries. And so, and we currently, if you would just love this image, we share a desk. Like I work with my husband. We clocked it of a 24-hour day, including sleeping in the same bed. We spend about 22 hours together. Wrap your minds around my reel. Can somebody say, oh, Lord? No, we do. We share the same desk. So it's beautiful and it works for us, and I don't know how, and it's funny. So when Becky told me the topic, it's funny because this is Becky also shared that I am in women's ministry. And I'm not sure how often you guys talk about what you love. Most women, we forget what we love and we do what we do. That has been a passion of mine lately, is to figure out what I love. And so before it sounds really holy when I say this, actually what I love is the word. At any given time, humans drive me crazy. That's awful, but it's just my reel. But I love this. And so I need to come to you with this subject knowing it's just going to be the word tonight. Huh? You want me? Which one? Okay. I told Stuart I don't do good on handhelds. So we're about to have a lesson in humility for me. And I will accept it graciously because it turns out I talk with my hands. So we're going to embrace this. All right, because I'm sitting here practicing my humility, you all are going to do it with me. How many of you, and you could be little, but you're going to be honest, lived in the time that would define baby boomer generation or older? Raise your hand. Congratulations. That's a beautiful thing. How many of you fall into millennials or younger? Don't be afraid. I'm not going to sling any arrows. You are safe. This is a safe place. The reason I talk about this is because generation to generation, real was not relevant. If I spoke predominantly to this side of the crowd, because just that's where most of the hands came from, in that time, statistics just show us it was survival. You didn't really get to focus on what was real and what was not, because what was real was food, and it was employment, and it was war, and it was life. It was life expectancy, it was death. That's just real to you. So for some of you, this topic, you're like, well, I don't know what's so hard about it. You just suck it up, and you live, and you die, and that's real. But statistically, it hit with the millennials. And for anybody that wants to make a crack, don't do it to me, I don't like it. But the millennial generation, all of you that find yourself coming after the baby boomers, life got less of a struggle to survive, and it became a struggle to belong. Where do I fit? We weren't battling for food, survival. Even in times like my oldest that you saw, he's never lived in a time that doesn't have war. He was born shortly before 9/11, and so he's never known a time. So for him, war is so real, it's not real because it's always been there. It's just there. So to even approach and look at the thought of forever real, you have to grasp that every one of you in this room take the word real differently. It's authentic. It's authenticity. It's becoming a forever version of authentic. And if you are millennials or younger, it is what your generation has been fighting for. You haven't fought for food or shelter. You have fought for somebody to go, this is real. This will sustain. But ironically, every study shows that the farther we get from survival, the less real everything has become. I have a phone in my pocket that displays every version of unreal, real imaginable. I have teenagers, so we have social media. We have, I don't like Facebook, so I don't do it. But we have Instagram. We have every type of plug-in, pluggable. If it has an eye, we probably have it. And everything is less and less real. So you need to know that for any other time, this is relevant, but here's the most relevant because it's changing the way we live. There has never been a highest rate of depression, even coming out of the Great Depression. There has never been such a high rate of depression, and never for kids as low as it is now, ever. And then you come back to the reality is to them, nothing is real. Everything is marginalized. That picture of my family was beautiful, and it was the one good one, because what was real that you didn't see is there were bugs. And I don't mean one bug, I mean we got into a swarm of bugs. And she would say, stop moving, and we would smile, and then we would all move. And that's the world your grandkids live in, your kids live in, you live in. It's the way we operate in comparison. It's the way we are slowly rotting our culture away, is in the lack of the real. So tonight, instead of, and that was a really depressing opening, so that was some real for you. But I have a firm belief, and it's one of the things that I love, is that anytime you know a problem, there is a solution. You just have to be willing to go. So if you are in this room, and maybe you're not in a season where you struggle with real, we are going to the story of Ruth. If you can't find something in this story, we're going to start again, and it's going to be late, and we're already past my bedtime. So let's dig in. Now, before we do that, actually, and did I lose it? We laugh because Stuart and I didn't line up on translations. So in your book, I'm going to read with you. There is a print of Romans 12. If you don't even have to be a student of the word. You could be a master at Google. But if you are a master of Google or student of the word, you would know that Romans was written by Paul. And it is the only letter he wrote to a church he did not start. He had no connection to the church in Rome. He loved them because they were of the body. But if you look at any of his other letters, he wrote to issues, to people, to brokenness, to healing, to happiness, but he wrote specifically. He was in Corinth when he wrote the letter to the Romans. And this was a church of believers in Rome that he had never met, but he was trying to teach the whole gamut of what it meant to be a believer. Romans is written to believers. So when we read this, and I'm going to read this to you, just a portion of it, you need to know this was written, if I had been in the Church of Rome, I would be sitting while somebody read Paul's letter to us from Corinth. And we are going to start at verse 9. I'm going to encourage you, though, take this and dig through it on your own. All of Romans is beautiful, but I like this part. So verse 9, love must be sincere. Hate what is evil. Cling to what is good. Be devoted to one another in love. Honor one another above yourselves. Never lacking in zeal, put your spiritual fervor serving the Lord. Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. Share with the Lord's people who are in need. Practice hospitality. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Mourn with those who mourn. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be proud, but be willing to associate with people of low position. Do not be conceited. Do not repay evil for evil, but be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everyone. And if it's possible, as far as it depends on you, live in peace with everyone. Has anybody already said, well, this isn't real? Do not take revenge, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath, for it is written, it is mine to avenge, I will repay, says the Lord. On the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. In doing so, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. And I read that because if you look in the little subtext in your Bible, and I don't know what yours said, but mine says the Christian ethics of living. And I thought, okay, well, that's a lot. And so instead of us tearing through Romans and listing out more that we're going to fail with, we're going to dive into some of the specific truths. You will set yourself up for failure if in reading that you decide everything about you is horrible and it must be fixed immediately. That's what the word is for. He's constantly dividing, constantly. He never went at a field and just mowed it down. He thinned, he moved, he prunes. And so we're going to prune tonight. We're just going to pick and prune. We're going to let him pick and prune. So we are going to go to Ruth, the book of Ruth. And Stuart was so kind. It is printed out for you. Again, it is not my translation, so when the words don't, it's not my translation. I have not authored a translation. But mine is a little different, and mine is marked up, and so I'm going to read from mine. But you and I are going to have a history lesson, because a lesson for all of you is you are all students and scholars of the Word. Should be your ultimate confidence. Hear me. I have no seminary degree. I have a psychology degree. I can tell you if you're crazy or not, but it's not going to help you. But I was desperate for someone to tell me the truth. And a side part of my life in ministry is I write curriculum for children, the children in the churches that we've served. And it doesn't come from an abundance of skill. It comes from a history, and hear me when I say this, of beautiful Sunday school teachers that taught me short snippets of the truth, but I never got the whole picture. And instead of building upon building, at some point, it just stopped. So what we're going to do tonight is we're just going to dissect Ruth a little bit. And we're just going to let the word teach us some truths that I needed. I have to tell you, I have learned more from this. If anybody doesn't go away with something, I did. So clearly I needed it. So let's start with Ruth 1. And we're going to set the stage. And we're going to do this a piece at a time because hopefully this just, it's good. During the time of Judges, there was a famine in the land. Judges, the book of Judges, that's where we're at. All of Israel is being judged. Nobody else is. All of Israel is being judged. That is where Ruth is. Take Ruth and just slide her right into the book of Judges. That's where the story of Ruth happens. There was a famine in the land, and a man left Bethlehem in Judah with his wife and 2 sons to stay in the territory of Moab for a while. So we're going to stop there. If you know anything about, again, Google or Bible history, Moab is not a place that a Jew wanted to live. Go back to the Sodom and Gomorrah, a tale that, you get locked in your mind, and go back to Lot and his daughters. Lot got drunk. Daughter slept with him. This is an awful part of the story. A child, Stacy, there's no way to swing that for children. I'm just saying, that's it. That you let that one go for a little bit. And his eldest daughter had a son and named him Moab. And that is where the tribe of Moab started. From an ancestral relationship, from a young girl who got her father drunk because she was desperate to have a solution to a problem that was never really going to be there. That is Moab. And it never redeemed itself from its beginning. So when you get and you see the word Moab, you can know they had no God affiliation with the one true God, even though Lot was literally the ancestor with Abraham. The sever was so severe. And from this, Moab became so hedonistic that it actually practiced pagan human sacrifices. Like that is Moab. So you have a Jewish man who's taken his wife and 2 sons because they were suffering under the sin of their people, and he took them into a heathen land for food. So that's where we're going. So we have the man name is Elimelech. Thankfully, I don't have to say that one often. It means my God is king. That tells us that Elimelech's parents were people of faith. And his wife was named Naomi, pleasant, my delight, and joy. That is Naomi. So we have my God is king and a wife that is joy and pleasant. And they have 2 sons, and Lord help us. Chilion means perishing, sickly, and consumptive. His brother was Mahlon, weakly, sick, and affirmed. That's the family leaving Bethlehem. So we have 2 sickly because their names mean something. Never go to the word without thinking it means something. Everything means something. So we have joy and delight. We have God is my king leaving Bethlehem with 2 sickly boys. That's what we have. And we're not even through the 3rd verse. They were Ephraimites from Bethlehem. They entered the fields of Moab to settle there. And I'm confident, they say they don't know who wrote the book of Ruth. I'm confident it was a man because there's no details. There's just no details because the very next words were Naomi's husband dies. See, doesn't that sound like a man wrote that plot? Naomi's husband dies. And he died. And she was left with her 2 sons, 2 sickly sons, remember? Her sons, and we're going to watch, her sons took Moabite women as their wives. One was named Orpah, and the second was named Ruth. That's important because a verse ahead, it was his sons. And then in that verse, she was left with her sons. Our woman full of joy had now taken ownership of 2 sickly boys. And the rush for wives was not because it was that time. when we go to the Word, it's to know that we will never understand it by Western eyes. And so what is truth in the Old Testament is they had no promise of heaven. At this point, there were no prophets that were speaking into the future. There were no promises of Isaiah. Death was death. It was death. You were done. In fact, I was telling Julie, I'm reading Job right now, which just be grateful I'm not teaching that. And he talks about, just let me go so I can just go. Because for them, death was death, and offspring was your only afterlife. Like that was the only way you were going to have any impact, because there was no discussion of heaven or hell. You were just dead. And so Naomi rushes because she needs offspring, because her husband's dead and his name is on the line. So she rushes and gets 2 Moabite women as their wives. And they live in Moab for 10 years. And then Mahlon and Chilion also die. And Naomi was left without her children and without her husband. So if you were ever going to define real, she was living out a real that most of us would be terrified of. That real where you go, just let that be someone else's strength that you gave them, and I'll pick a different story for mine. But this was Naomi doing survival. But we're going to use these 2 women because I believe as a woman that we have so misrepresented the way that God uses women in the Word. And when they are named, when their story is given, there is so much impact and reason. So you and I are going to set a moment, and we're just going to look at Ruth and Naomi over these next, really we're going to kind of bounce back and through. Because Naomi changes her mind. She's been in Moab. She has no sons. She has no husband. She literally has no house. She was living in goat tents. And so in her grief and in her desperation, she says, I'm going home. I'm done. I'm going home. And that's what she does. And in that, you're going to look, and I just love it because everyone leaves, and you can picture this. You have a grieving mom, and you have 2 grieving women who've never had children. We suddenly have a group of women without ownership, without belonging. And they get a little bit down the road, which is like 7 days' journey. We're going to say, and they had to cross the Jordan River. I mean, they weren't just walking a town over. 5 to 7 day journey, crossing the Jordan River by themselves as women. And Naomi turns, and she changes the story. And first, you and I are going to learn some lessons about real faith from Ruth. Naomi sends them home, tries to send them home. Orpha listens, and she literally steps out of the pages of Scripture at that moment. We have no idea what happens. There's no history, there's no records, there's nothing. Orpha chose her journey. In her grief, we're going to accept that we can all sit here and judge thousands of years later, but she has lost her husband. She is leaving the only town she's ever known. But we're going to learn from Ruth. The first thing that you're going to see is Ruth set herself as faithful. And when I mean set herself, she made a choice. You will never be real, and you will never have real faith until you make that authentic choice. Again, they wept loudly. Orpha kissed her mother. I am in verse 14. Kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. There was no reason, ladies. Naomi clung to her. Naomi said, look, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people, and mark this under, to her gods. It was Moab. They had lots of them. But follow your sister. If you have your word in front of you, circle the word but. Verse 16 says, but Ruth replied. But tells you in that moment, Ruth made a choice. There were 2 options. There was go home to what we know, It's what's easier, it's what's common, it's what's accepted. But Ruth chose faithfulness. Here's the truth. After 10 years of marriage, she was totally without child. We don't know where the infertility lied. We know that she was a widow that belonged to a widow with no dowry. In fact, Naomi, in her deep grief, tries to explain to her that she's too old to have kids and she's too old to get married and she's too old. Anybody in their 40s, y'all can all do a little holler, because that's about how old Naomi was. So I was reading this going, but that was real. At that time, she was done. We're not done yet, ladies. But yes, I'm in my 40s. But that's where Ruth was. Everything about her choice was going to be on blind faith in a God that is not hers yet. And you and I are going to operate in the truth that our real will never come easy. It will operate in blind faith many, many times. He is never going to let us step into a path and look all the way down. The realness of Romans 12 comes in the steps of blind faith. It's the moment where you have a chance and you choose the but. It's when I go, I don't like talking in front of people, which is my real, but I do love what the word says, and so it's worthy. Maybe for you, it's, I don't like changing, but God's calling me to change. Or maybe it's, I don't know if I can do life differently. Whether it's divorce or it's death or it's a stage of parenting where what you're facing in the real leads you to a but. And that's where Ruth was. But Ruth replied, don't plead with me to abandon you or to return and not follow you. And what I'm about to read is listed as every wedding. If you've ever performed a wedding, been to a wedding, like, you're going to hear this. It's so funny to me because if you study it, like, there's no truth. I mean, you wouldn't necessarily claim it as truth, but I'm going to show you that. So she states, for wherever you go, I will go. Where you live, I will live. Ruth shows us faithfulness in the absolute unknown. You and I travel. We go. Even if in small worlds, our world is big. You looked at the pictures up there and you knew pictures you've never been. That was not her world. Her world was Moab. And her mother-in-law, deep in grief, with no ownership, no man to protect them, was saying, I'm going to walk 7 days through the great unknown. And Ruth was going, I'll go. I'm not sure where you fall into the unknown. I despise the unknown. I am not quite the like detail planner that Susan's daughter is, but I'm not at all like Stuart is when it comes to travel. Like, I love known. I love details. I love background. I love preparation. I love a good first aid kit. I love known. Somebody raise their hand. Do you love the known? Come on, somebody. Not everybody's an adventurer in this room. I don't believe you. Ruth literally in these words says, where you live, I'll live. And we're going to take a step in some real right there. The Jews hated Moabites. Hated to a level of racism that will chart through the rest of this book. In the defense on the 4th chapter, when Boaz is begging for her, or is claiming her hand, she is still Ruth the Moabitess. Like, she is choosing to step faithfully into a land that's not hers. And I just wonder if it is that willingness that we have. Because when you usher these words, because this is really our song to God. Ruth is our song, our real song to God. It's that concept. These words of Ruth are what it means to like lay down the old man and pick up the new man. And so I've never, ever, ever found the confidence to say, wherever you go, I'll go. You just tell me. He gets me there. But it's never with that, let's go. And that's what she did. She risked rejection. She risked disappointment. She risked racism. She risked homesickness like you would never believe. She risked it all. And it wasn't because Naomi. It was because of a belonging that she knew she was called to. Go to the very next part. For wherever you live, I will live, and your people will be my people. In this, Ruth shows us the power of faithful acceptance. We serve in Alabama, in coastal Alabama, and so, there's it's a small, large town, if that makes sense. Like, the people have been there forever, and they know who belongs and who doesn't. And so there is a thing about slowly becoming part. Like it's slow and it becomes a process. And that's what Ruth was facing. When she said, your people will be my people, it meant she was promising to adopt the laws, adopt the food, adopt their worship, adopt their rituals, adopt their culture. And she knew these people were starving. They were coming out of a famine. But she looks at Naomi and she says, your people will be my people. And so when I was researching this for tonight, I love Matthew Henry as a commentator, and he made this statement. So I'm reading this to you, and I'm kind of like preparing myself as it comes across, because he makes this connection that this charge falls to us when it comes to faithfully embracing the body of Christ. Those people are my people. So if you are my people, then they are my people. And he says, if they be his, they must be ours. That is one of the most painful thoughts if you've ever wanted to not claim anyone in the body of Christ. And I have. But here is the truth, is if I'm going to be real in my faith, I'm going to shed the right to say, well, that's not how we do things. And you never say that straight up. You kind of tilt. That's not how we do things. That's not where that goes. And I say this with a jest, but there are churches, bodies of Christ that are ripped apart because we're not willing to say, well, you're my people. That may not be how I like it, but you're my people. So we're gonna talk. We're gonna show respect. We're gonna live in the real and go, okay, when it comes to the word, we're gonna line up. When it comes to carpet color, we may not, but you're my people. And that is what Ruth was saying. Please do not set this woman up as on a pole, because she would have battled. She would have stepped into a racist Bethlehem as a widow. If you read through chapter 2, when Naomi goes and meets everyone, they don't even acknowledge Ruth. Naomi doesn't acknowledge Ruth. But here in this, she's going, you're my people. And that, if you are real in the faith, it is going to reflect that you are real in accepting the body of Christ. Whether they're a student and they're making too much noise, or there's somebody running in a place that you don't like, you will never impact, you will never be real if you can't look at the person sitting next to you and going, wow, you're in the same body I am. That means you're mine. If you're his people, you're my people. So we're going to be people together. We're going to figure this out. The next part, and I love this. I am not dramatic, but I think you might disagree with me after this. But The last line of this says, your God will be my God. The not dramatic part of me wants to get you to understand that at that moment, genealogy and heaven aligned as the woman that would be part of the very genealogy of Christ stepped into faith. Like, your God will become my God. She stepped out from the gods of her security, and we have those, ladies. The gods of my perfection, the gods of preparedness, all of the things, and we do this, the gods of my own provision. And Ruth stepped away from all of it and said, your God will be my God. And in that moment, she solidified the next line of genealogy. I don't think any of you got that excited about it, but that's okay. Because I was excited for all of us. Being real will require the same for us. That moment when you line up and say, that is my God. That is not the God of my grandma. That is not the God of my mama. That is my God. A total faith claiming. A faith that this is my faith. For every young woman in the room, it's the ability to not just trust all the stories you've heard, but take this and go, this is my word, and it's my God. And it's relevant, and it's active, and it's cutting, and it's real, and it's changing, and it's not old, and it's not dated, and I'm going to wrestle, and I may have a limp from it. But also, for everyone over my age, let's just do that, it means that you let everyone see that God is your God. It means mentoring. It means living out a real faith. It means sharing the ugly. It means Ruth went into it with eyes wide open. Naomi had said in clear, your God, my God, has called on a famine. Every part of Ruth knew the judgment of God, and yet she still stepped into faith. And that is just the real. And I love it. But I need you to also know that this story gets overdone with Ruth sometimes and underdone with Naomi. And so you and I are going to have the last few minutes together dealing with some real, authentic grief. So we've set Naomi. We've set her as real. She's a widow. She has lost both of her sons. She now is walking into town, this is a small town. Hers was smaller. This is a woman walking into a group of women. Imagine walking into church and they knew all your business. And it was not good business. You had been abandoned in her mind by God. Husband gone, sons gone, infertility proof with a wife, a daughter-in-law, 10 years without a child. And so you and I are just going to have to sit a little bit and have a hard lesson on some realness that comes with mourning and grief. So if you turn, well, I don't know if you have the whole, let's see, I'm comparing. Oh, I like my translation better. I'm going to read it to you because I thought this was funny. So verse 18, when Naomi saw that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped talking to her. That's my translation. Have any of you been in a situation where all of a sudden it got really uncomfortable? I had one of those. We were not married yet, and my husband went to seminary in Southwestern. And we were moving, we were getting married, but we were not married, so we traveled with my in-laws to Texas from Alabama. It's a long way. And it's really a long way when you're pulling out of the school parking lot and they get in a fight in the car, and they don't talk to each other for hours. Hours. This was Ruth and Naomi. Days. She stopped talking. That was where our woman Ruth, our real Ruth was. She didn't have anything left in her. Have you hit a moment like that ever? Where you just didn't have it in you to do another word? Like you couldn't fake it another minute? You couldn't offer another platitude. You couldn't offer another fake. You thought maybe if I opened my mouth one more time, I might scream. Or I might just not show back up. That was where Naomi was. And we see in her, and it's beautiful if you're comfortable enough to wrestle it out, Naomi's about to prove that real faith grieves when it's needed. You need to write that down, everyone. Real faith grieves when needed. And we're going to back that up with Scripture. So Naomi and Ruth travel in, and they get into Bethlehem. And if you look in verse 20 of chapter 1, the first words to her friends are beautiful joy. Our woman of great vibrance is, don't call me Naomi, call me Mara. Bitter. Remember the bitter water that came from the ground? Mara, the land called Mara. That's where she was. For the Almighty has made me bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why do you call me Naomi, since the Lord has opposed me and the Almighty has afflicted me? So Naomi came back from the territory of Moab with her daughter-in-law, Ruth, the Moabitess. They arrived in Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. A hard reality to being real in your faith is you're going to grieve. I loved as she worshiped and shared, because in the truth, and I love the last song, is that thought that it is well, but the truth is before it can be well, it must be grieved. And we, as I'm going to say, as a Western culture, it's one of the things that we do the worst, is give someone the right to grieve. It makes us uncomfortable. It's ugly. We don't understand it, and we don't want to mess with it. And so that's what we do. We take away the right to grieve, or we give it deadlines. You should be done by this point. You shouldn't still be dealing this. Where is your faith? Well, my faith is still there, but it's under a load of real. And so what you see in Naomi, the story of Ruth is beautiful, but the story of Naomi is majestic in its realness, because we get to wrap up this story with Naomi, and I love it. But what I love more than anything is that she didn't put a definition to her grief. And when somebody said, "How are you doing?" she didn't went, "I'm good." No, she just laid it all out. Because at some point, and maybe you haven't found the safe place yet, but you have to lay out grief. Unresolved grief. And before we step, we're going to define grief. Grief is any type of expectation that is not met, and there is loss. I am going to step into the next year of high school prepared to grieve the very healthy grief of my first child going away to college. And nobody's going to take that from me. If you have watched a marriage crumble, you can grieve. If you have watched an able body collapse under the reality of this earth, you can grieve. If you have watched a mental capacity diminish, whether it's from depression or anxiety, or you have crippled with fear, you can grieve. Some of you need the right to have somebody square you up in the face and say, you can grieve, because it was not supposed to be like this. Christ himself at Lazarus, when it says Jesus wept, he didn't weep because of Lazarus. Literally minutes later, the man is alive. He wept because it was never supposed to be like that. Lazarus was alive, and Jesus knew he was going to die again. He wasn't going to stay in a cycle of life. He grieved. You and I have the right to grieve because it's not supposed to be like this. Naomi could look at you and go, it was not supposed to be like this. I had sons. They should have had babies. I had a husband. We had property. He died. They died. And now I'm stuck with Ruth, the Moabitess. It's awful. I'm telling you, it's awful. That's real. But she grieved. That is part of your real. Go back and read Romans 12 again when you have time later. You weep with those that weep. That means somebody started weeping. And what that means, and I just feel compelled to explain this, is it means you don't have to have an answer. There's not a platitude, a verse, a magic word. There's nothing. Most of the time, it's better if you just don't say anything. Or if you do laundry. Laundry is good to help with grief. But listen, you have the right. I'm just telling you, I've grieved, offered to do somebody's laundry for them. But you need to understand that's the real of this faith too. Don't let anyone hand you that your faith is going to be without troubles. Do not buy that. Because then that takes away the rest of this story. It takes away the real. And I love this story. So the hard journey lets your grief be redeemed. And that's one thing that we get to end Naomi's story with. If you have your word with you, then you can go to the end. If not, I'm going to read it to you. Ruth 4, we all think of this as Ruth's happy ending. But if you read carefully, Ruth and Naomi both get a happy ending. So go to Ruth 4 if you have your copy of the word. Boaz has redeemed Ruth. He's chosen to buy back what was lost. That is redemption, to buy back what is lost. And Boaz makes the choice to buy back what is lost. And if we had another session, and we don't, so you probably are happy, because tomorrow we're not, that one's already done. But if we'd had a third one, verse 11 would be where we were, because it says, "May the Lord make the woman who is entering your house like Rachel and Leah, who built the house of Israel." You want to talk about two women with a real hot mess of a story? That would have been it. That would have been our third one. But go to verse 14. The women said to, 13. Boaz took Ruth. She became his wife. I have the modern version, so it's honest. And he said he slept with her. And the Lord granted conception to her, and she gave birth to a son. And the women said to Naomi, "Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you without a family redeemer today. May his name become well known in Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. Indeed, your daughter-in-law, who loves you and is better to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him." And any woman in this room, or man, who has ever grieved this verse, Naomi took the child, placed him on her lap, and became his nanny. And the neighbor women said, "A son has been born to Naomi," and they named him Obed. And he was the father of Jesse and the father of David. In a handful of verses, a woman that was widowed, sonless, nameless, set in a cycle of grief, got to end a story with a kinsman redeemer of redemption. And the beautiful part of this is that is our story. Literally, a name for Christ is Redeemer, to buy back. And what's great is it didn't just buy back Ruth. It bought back Naomi. She belonged. Her story was redeemed. If you are in a place of grief right now, know that as a daughter or son of Christ, your story has been redeemed. Even in the grief, your story has been redeemed. Like the ending has been set. Revelations 21 sets it. If you need to know your ending, there it is. That's the moment that you cling to as you're living out that redemption story. But anything that is in the brokenness of this world has been redeemed in the belonging of Christ. It's just truth. We have it. That's the story of Naomi. But where are you in this? If you are a believer, then you hold to that fact. Your story has been entirely redeemed. But you still may be caught in the messy middle of living out the redemption. So how does it change your real? In the realness of life, it's going to require more than the occasional token act of goodness or faith. It's going to require consistent choice. It's just not. We cast snacks or offerings to God in hopes that it will be enough to make things good again. And he's in our real, and he's never going to be out of our real, but he's never going to let us just pacify him. He's just going to call, kindly and ruthlessly call to the real. Past the smile, past the fakeness. He's just gonna keep in the sweetness. And it's not because he's mean. It's because he's real. And he knows for your faith to sustain in this ever changing world, it's going to have to be real. So it's going to mean, and I typed these words, and the whole time I went, well, I don't like any of these words, but I'm just going to read. To choose real faithfulness will mean that I set aside my need for control, my desire for things to be a certain way, typically my way, or my right to fairness. I have to set all of that aside because on this earth, none of that is real. But if that is what drives me, then I will always be in the first part of Naomi, wrestling out why he's unfair. I will never get to the beauty of redemption and healing because I'm going to be figuring out why he's not doing it my way. And he's not going to do it your way because remember, he was actually at the end of the book. And so he knows the best way. But it also means that our faith may not be immediately rewarded. I'm going to read this verse to you because I think it's powerful. Chapter 2, verse 23. And if you read, this is the reason why we read the word, ladies, like read it. Read it verse by verse, word by word. Ruth stayed close to Boaz's female servants and gathered grain until the barley and the wheat harvests were finished, and she lived with her mother-in-law. That sounds pretty basic. If you go to a biblical calendar, what that means is that she lived out the story of servant grief from April through August, daily going to the fields, picking up the leftovers, literally leaning and gleaning, sore back, worn out, going home to a very angry mother-in-law who was trying some way to figure out what to do for months. This was not a fast story. We can read through it quickly. It's just 4 chapters. But this was months of real, months of choosing, months of heading out that door going, these people are my people, even though I don't like half of these people. They are my people, and this God is my God, even though I have no idea what he's doing. And I made the choice to live here. I left my mama. I left the food that I like. I left the people I like. This is it. I am choosing faithfulness day after day after day after day. That is in that one verse, months. And you and I living out real right now, it's not like, I give you this, God, you do this for me. I give you this, you do this for me. I'm going to go to church, you do this. I'm going to do this. You line up the husband, you provide the children, you keep us healthy, you provide the retirement. Like, I'm doing my part, you're doing this part. It was understanding that real is just faithful obedience while we wait to see his hand. And it may take months, and it may take years, or it could be like Abraham, and when Hebrews says, and he never saw the fruit of his real, but he lived in the faith that it was. That's what real faithfulness is. For us, it also means that realness, whether faithfulness or grief, is hard work. It's hard work. Ruth and Naomi would both tell you they toiled, they bore burdens, they grieved, they cried, they screamed. They loved, it was real, and it was hard work. And you will not have a real, authentic faith without hard work. It's not going to fall on you. If you come to church for an hour and a half every week, it will not happen. It just won't. And that's not me being negative. I'm generally a very positive person. You wouldn't know this by this current story, but it just won't. Because it would be like you wanting a total body transformation 1 hour a week. That's not going to happen either. There's another negative. It is daily choices. It's consistent buts. This is what I want, but I. And you step. It's choosing to grieve well towards a purpose. It's choosing to suffer and toil, or it's choosing to have joy. It's choosing to follow faithfully. It's choosing to mentor even if you don't think you have anything left to give. It's choosing to speak truth into a young woman instead of casting judgment. It's going against what is in your nature to speak what is into your spirit, what is into what is needed. That is what it means. And being real is being rooted in the reality of the promise that we cannot see, the story God is writing. And I get to end with the best part of Ruth. And you are going to think this is insanity until I read it. The story of Ruth ends with genealogy. I love genealogy. I'm just a nerd. We'll just embrace it and we're all going to move on. But I'm going to make a journey into genealogy for any of you who need the reality of redemption right now. Verse 18 in chapter 4. David's genealogy from Judah's son. Now these are the family records of Perez. Perez, and we're just going to have to stop right there. Perez was the son of Judah and Tamar. Tamar, if you've never heard this story, the Old Testament is fascinating, was the widow whose father-in-law refused to mate her with, to partner her with a brother. And so she dressed as a prostitute and slept with her father-in-law on the side of the road, became pregnant. It was the only way to redeem the line. Remember, redemption of the line was everything. And that woman earned herself smack dab into the line of Christ. That's how this story starts, with Perez. Then Hezron fathered Ram. Ram fathered Abinadab. Aminadab fathered Nahshon. Nahshon fathered Salome. You can say Salmon, but that's not how you say it. Salome. And we're going to stop right there. Because Salome, his wife was Rahab. If you've ever read the story, or to your kids or your grandkids, about the prostitute that cast the red rope over, that was Salome's parents. A woman lost in prostitution, desperate to save her family, redeemed into the full line of Christ. That was Salome. Salome fathered Boaz. Boaz fathered Obed. Obed fathered Jesse, and Jesse fathered David. What you're going to know is whatever battle you really live out, your real is rooted in the reality of a promise. From the beginning to end of the book, it is why your faith matters. It's why the battle to be real as women matters. Because whether your story is like Rahab or your story is like Ruth, it is redeemed in the same Savior. And that is where the full story of real comes from. In the one man who took off heavenly form to put on earthly flesh, to live out a real faith. And then in his beautiful providence, anchored it all so that he could hand his word and go, daughter, it will not be easy. And you will not be able to withstand this world in the weight of your church attendance. You're going to need some real. And these are the daughters that have gone before you that have made this work. who have lived out real, who have grieved well, who have faith well, who have forgiven well, who have been forgiven well, who didn't sit in their shame, that didn't sit in their judgment, but they were worthy examples of what it means. Right now, we're just going to have a quiet moment in your chair. And as Adam plays, you have notes section. If you haven't written all night, I want you to take a moment and just write down where your reel is stuck. Whether it's in a lifetime of law and expectation, or the battle to see if church is just really something you do. This is nothing you're going to share or show. This is just you. As you listen to the story of Ruth, just writing down what was your reel for the minute. So just sit together, sit quietly, reflect, but write something down that you're learning, that's something that spoke about where your reel is at.